Mary Harrington, author of Feminism Against Progress, discusses her analysis of feminism as emerging in the aftermath of the Industrial Revolution, when men and women were recalibrating their social roles. She argues that feminism divided into two branches: the feminism of care, which is less classically feminist, and the feminism of freedom, which most people would identify with modern feminism. Harrington explores the transhumanist spin on the feminism of freedom, discussing the invention of the birth control pill and its radical effects on individuals and society. She contends that while the pill was touted as a gateway to sexual utopia and equality, it rapidly led to widespread abortion, destabilization of sexual relations between men and women, and the commodification of female sexuality. Harrington traces the origins of feminism back to the Industrial Revolution, which dramatically altered the traditional roles of men and women. In pre-industrial agrarian societies, both men and women worked within productive households, with women's work generally compatible with childcare. The Industrial Revolution first removed men from the home, then began to replace women's traditional work with consumer products. This shift reduced women's economic agency and confined them to the role of consumers in private homes. Harrington identifies two characteristic responses from women to these industrial changes. The first, which she terms the feminism of care, involved women making a case for the ongoing value of the private sphere and women's work within it, particularly in nurturing children and maintaining a moral haven from the competitive market society. The second response, the feminism of freedom, argued for women's entry into market society on the same terms as men, including property rights and the ability to work outside the home. Harrington argues that the feminism of freedom definitively won over the feminism of care in the mid-20th century with the introduction of hormonal birth control. This technology, she contends, allowed for the flattening of irreducible differences between the sexes and led to a ratchet effect towards the legalization of abortion. She sees this as the entry into the Transhumanist Era, where women's existence became inextricably linked to medical technologies. The podcast explores the downstream consequences of entering the Transhumanist Era, including the commodification of female sexuality, the destabilization of sexual relations, and the radical transformation of social mores. Harrington argues that these changes have not necessarily led to the promised utopia of equality and sexual freedom, but instead have created new problems and exacerbated existing ones. The conversation delves into evolutionary biology, discussing the concepts of R-selected, rapid reproduction, low investment, and K-selected, few offspring, high investment, reproductive strategies. Harrington and Peterson explore how these strategies might apply to human mating behaviors and how the sexual revolution may have inadvertently favored R-selected strategies, particularly among men with dark triad personality traits, narcissism, Machiavellianism, and psychopathy. Harrington critiques what she calls magazine feminism, which she sees as a thin ideological veneer over a hedonistic project. She distinguishes this from more serious feminist political theory and activism, which she believes still has legitimate goals. She argues that the concept of patriarchy, as commonly understood in modern feminist discourse, no longer exists in the Western world. Instead, she suggests that many of the issues attributed to patriarchy are actually reflections of immutable sex differences. Harrington discusses the marginalization of motherhood and matriarchy within modern feminist discourse. She proposes a three-part hero's journey for women: the maiden, focused on professional ambition; the mother, oriented towards home and family; and the matriarch, engaged in community service and public-spirited work. She argues that modern feminism tends to focus almost exclusively on the maiden stage, neglecting the valuable contributions of mothers and matriarchs to society. The conversation touches on how technology, particularly dating apps and pornography, has impacted relationships between men and women. Harrington suggests that these technologies have further commodified sexuality and potentially exacerbated problematic dynamics between the sexes. Harrington expresses concern about the lack of healthy relationship models for young people today, many of whom are growing up without stable family structures. She suggests that there may be painful teething troubles as people attempt to form enduring relationships without proper guidance or social scaffolding. However, she remains optimistic that human cultures and social fabric are resilient over the long term. Regarding contraception and social policy, Harrington expresses ambivalence. She objects to hormonal contraception due to its transhumanist characteristics and its negative effects on women's biochemistry, mate choice, and the environment. However, she is more open to non-hormonal methods of contraception, particularly those that work with natural fertility cycles. She advocates for an approach that employs technologies in a way that is ordered to human nature rather than in revolt against it. The conversation concludes with a discussion of the challenges facing young people in forming stable relationships and the potential return to more traditional values. Harrington, while describing herself as a reactionary feminist, expresses hope that society can find a way to balance technological advancements with respect for human nature and the formation of enduring social bonds.